We are a proud sponsor and introducing the Modernizing HR strategy session. Your speaker today is Jose LP, founder and CEO of the HR ICU. I'll hand this over to Jose.
Thank you. Okay, so if it's too loud, you can always close the other door, but otherwise we're gonna just get interrupted, so that's fine, people walking in and out. So thank you for coming this afternoon. I know the booths are always very exciting to see. So as Kyle said, my name is Jose LP. I've been in HR for 28 years now, so quite some time. And I started HR on cruise ships. Has anyone been on a cruise ship before? Okay. And do you know that it is disastrous on cruise ships? Right? There are employee issues like you would not believe, things that you could not even imagine, that if any of us in HR could write a book, it would be ridiculously interesting. So that was my foundation to HR, was being woken up at 4 o'clock in the morning because there's 2 people drunk, or someone is having an argument, or we're arriving in port and there's dogs coming on, so we have to be careful. Or we have employees lighting candles because they needed to pray, but candles are forbidden on cruise ships, right? Because of fire and everything. So that was sort of like my trajectory to doing HR, was like every day was putting out a fire. So when I started business, this is also how I started the brand. My brand name is called ICU because it's called Intensive Care Unit. So no one ever calls HR when everything's going great. You know, people call HR because there's a problem, right? So show of hands, who have challenges? Who do you have, or any of you, do you have challenges with your employees in the workplace? Right. And show of hands now, who actually has HR in their business? Okay, awesome. And a lot of times it ends up being you in the room, you know, who tend to be HR, but you may not be HR full-time, you may be also a department head, you may be doing compensation, you may be doing other things, right? So you get like that jack of all trades, that's sort of what you become. So the 3 things I'm gonna talk about today should really not be a surprise to you, but I find in all of my experience in working with different clients is we need to adapt to the new market and we need to adapt to the new style of employees, right? Part of that is the new generation. So the 3 topics that we're gonna look at today is handling difficult behavior, when employees repeatedly fail, and HR and AI. The idea is I want to try to provide you with different types of tips and things that you can do, not just out of the textbook, right? Learning HR in textbook is great, but that's also not realistic. It's not really what works anymore, especially with ChatGPT, where everyone thinks that they can get an answer to something right then and there. So our first one is going to be handling difficult behavior. But before we do that, you have to understand who your employees are. So generally, this is not just construction, but generally 80% of Canadians feel that they're struggling at work, and only 20% feel that they're striving. Do you guys think that that's true in what you see in the market? That at least 80% of people, if you had to ask them, feel like they just didn't have their shit together, they were struggling? Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily mean what they're struggling with, it's just they're struggling. Something could be going on at home, something could be going on at work, etc. The idea is that you have 80% of your workforce that need help, and they tend to want to come to HR to help them, right? According to Statistics Canada, 50% of construction employees are struggling at work. So that is half of our workforce, and those statistics are literally from December last year. So December 2025, that means it's as real as it can be. We're only like 4 months into the year. And so if we have 50% of our employees are struggling, we also have 64% of those employees wish that you did more at work for them. It doesn't mean that you have to have a counseling program. Like, that's not what that means, but they wish that you provided something more to your employees to help them with that struggle. So in order to know what that is, you have to understand who your employees are. So let's first start with this. Show of hands, how many of you have an employee who's on a PIP? Does everyone know what a PIP is? Performance Improvement Plan, right. So show of hands, how many of you have an employee that's on PIP right now? Okay, only a few. Now, do you have employees who you probably should put on a PIP, but you haven't yet? Yeah, that's usually more. That tends to be a little bit more, because it takes time to do those things, right? So if we have 47% of construction employees feel like they're burnt out, technically, usually what happens is the burnt out employees, the ones that are sporadic, the ones that are just off the charts, are the ones that should be on a PIP. Because you're paying them to do a job that they're not actually doing, right? They're not meeting expectations because something is happening. Either they're late for work, either they are arguing with colleagues, maybe there's something going on at home, etc. But knowing that at least 4 to 7% of your workforce should be on a PIP, that also takes up a lot of your time. And instead, how come this didn't show up? Where's my bell curve? Oh, I had an image of a bell curve. So a typical HR bell curve used to be 80% of people would meet expectations, 10% of people were a challenge, and then the other 10% were fabulous. That's not the case anymore. Usually you have about 15, 17% of your workforce is challenged, and you have less people that are amazing. Does that sound about right at what's happening in your workforce nowadays, right? So when you're doing your performance reviews, you have to look at who actually are the people that you can count on and who are the people that are gonna take up a lot of your time. And that's what's happening is the people that are gonna take up a lot of your time has grown over the course of the years. Now, how many of you employ people that are under the age of 25? Okay, and so do you find that there's a difference between the younger workforce to someone who's, say, early 30s? Right, and are they, could you give me an example as to like what you feel are the differences in the workforce?
They expect clarity.
Yeah, great, they expect clarity. What else do we think it would be? Has anyone ever come to you now in the younger generation and said, oh, it's 4 o'clock, my shift is done, I gotta go, right? Like they don't even wanna stay 5 minutes later because they're not being paid for it. And I'm not suggesting that people should work for free. That's not what I mean. But like 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, etc. That's how most of us have grown up. You know, yes, you do a little bit more for the business because that's just being part of the business. That's also just being loyal to the company that you work for and everything, right? But now with the new generation, they don't want to do that extra 5 minutes. So that has become now a difficult behavior. That has become something that you have to manage, right? So can anyone give me examples, other examples, as to what would be considered a difficult behavior in the workplace?
Just how some may take corrective criticism or guidance.
Yep, absolutely, constructive criticism. What other examples do you guys may have? So do you have people who come in late?
Late cell phones.
Cell phones, oh yeah.
They don't want to stay 5 minutes late, but they steal time by being on their phone for 3 hours.
Yeah, yeah, very true. The cell phone is a fun one. What else? Does anyone have anything more serious? Do you have arguments? Do you have stealing product? So not just time, but like maybe stealing product? There's like a slew of things that we would say in HR that are like common things, right? This is my common things that I deal with a lot of my clients. And you would say, really, throwing objects? Yes. I can't tell you how many times I've gone onto a job site and there's people with X-Acto knives or hammers and they're like facing one another because they're pissed off, you know? And they're like, no, leave me alone. I told you, this is mine, whatever. Like they're just like, ego is gone beyond, but the challenge is now they have something in their hand and that becomes a weapon. So now that becomes something against the law, and now that becomes workplace violence, which, as many of you know, we have policies and laws about those things, right? So one of those things that I'm surprised, but it happens a lot, Coming in late is obviously very normal. Define leadership, so not following what you're asking them to do, and just not wanting to do what's in their job description. Those are obviously normal, common things, right? Now, what can you do, though, as a leader or as HR in your business? Well, normally, we would assume that we're going to write them up or put them on some sort of PIP. But what I'm suggesting to you first is the following. You have to now think about 3 different things. Is the reason why this person behaving a skill problem, a will problem, or is it truly a workplace issue, which could be behavior, so it could be the environment. So a skill challenge is obviously something that they may not know how to do. So it could be related to their job description. Maybe they didn't get enough training. Maybe the person who was supposed to train them just cut corners all the time and didn't realize it and then didn't train them on the proper process, right? So sometimes if it's a skill problem, it could be part of our issue as well. It could be the employer's fault as well. A will issue is they just don't want to. They don't give a shit. And we have a lot of employees like that. But if you can determine if it's a will issue, then you handle it in a completely different way, right? And then the third option is workplace issue. Is there something going on in the environment, right? So does Jane and Bob, perhaps, maybe they don't get along together, and maybe they're arguing and you didn't know about it, right? Or is Jane going out in the field for you and now she's being harassed by one of your customers and you didn't know that? That's also part of the environment, right? These are things that you can't necessarily control, but we can find parameters to help with that. So in order to determine if it's a skill, a will, or a workplace issue, we have to ask the right questions. So my first one for you today is, if you're going to say to someone, is there anything outside this task which is making it hard for you to do your job? Or if you say, what's getting in the way of you doing this? Do you think that's a skill? Do you think that's a will? Or do you think it's a workplace issue? Anyone? Anyone? Gonna bribe you with some chocolate?
Sounds like will.
Sounds like will? Okay. Any other suggestions? Could be a workplace issue. Yeah. It's definitely not skill, though. Does everyone agree to that one? Potentially. I'll show you something a little bit different later. But yeah, so this one is motivation, so it is about will. People don't have a motivation to do something, but it could also have been a workplace issue, right? Okay, let's try this one. How are things going with the team? I've noticed your focus and energy has changed. Want to tell me what's going on? Or, hey, what's going on with the crew? You seem different lately. What's up? Workplace issue? Right. So this is scenarios where you could have Jane and Bob are not getting along and it's affecting the environment, but maybe you don't know about it yet, right? And so having to ask your employees these types of questions are important for you to understand before you want to decide to send them on a PIP, write them up, or even terminate them. Because I do have some clients, it's like they don't care. They're like, I write a check and get out, But before you get to that point, you want to give someone some sort of benefit of the doubt, right? So asking these questions. Okay, this one. Walk me through how you would normally do this, or show me how you would do this. Is that skill, will, or workplace issue? 100% skill. So does that make a little bit more sense? To say you're asking them to basically show me what you're doing step by step, right? So when you're asking your employees the right questions, you can hopefully get the right answer to understand what the behavior, what the issue actually is, right? So that's why it's important for us to ask these questions before we jump to a conclusion and assume that something is going on, is you want to divide your situation to, is the employee have a bad behavior because of skill, will, or workplace issue? So once you've done that, Then you have to say, okay, now this person has repeatedly failed to meet expectations. What am I going to do next? This is usually what everyone wants to say, right? However, has anyone ever heard the term come to Jesus talk? Yes? Does anyone know what that is? Could you explain to me what you believe that is?
There's a serious issue that
Yep.
escalate.
Okay, perfect. What, someone over here? Yeah, exactly, realization moment, yeah. So when you go to school to get into HR, we don't learn about come to Jesus talk, right? But the more that you've been into HR and the more that you've we literally have this code that once it gets to a point, I would look at some other HR counterparts and we'd be like, oh, it's time, you know? And the reason why you do this is naturally, this is a cross Catholic, Catholic means Jesus, you know? But we would have this code between HR to be like, oh yeah, I know your issue, you need to do one of these, you know? And so you would have to get to this point where you're having this conversation with this individual and you need to be as straightforward as you could ever possibly be without being rude. And for many of you, you feel uncomfortable doing that. And frequently people ask me, well, can I really say these things? You know, and I was like, absolutely. There's no rules in HR what you can and cannot say unless it's something protected by human rights, which many of you know are age, nationality, religion. You're not gonna be asking those questions anyways because you're focusing on them and what's happening, right? So there's no real law about what you can and cannot say. And one of the most important things that I could absolutely urge any of you is to truly be as straightforward as possible. And so don't hide behind anything. Don't get nervous. Make sure you're ready to have the conversation and don't be vague. So has anyone heard of the sandwich technique? That is a super common technique. And I remember going to training sessions 20 years ago where someone was teaching me the sandwich technique, right? It's ooh, be nice, and then tell them what it really is, and then be nice again, you know? Because you want the person to leave feeling good. Okay, I appreciate that because we're all human, you know? However, when you're so nice, they don't really understand the severity of the situation because you're sugarcoating it. You know, they don't understand that they're going to be written up or they're very close to being terminated, you know? So you have to cut through all that BS and truly tell them you need to do X, Y, Z, right? Clearly lay out what's working or what's not. So our first one, you have to lay out what's not working, right? We need to talk about what's happening. You've been pushing back on direction, not following through on anything I'm asking. This is becoming a pattern. It's not acceptable. Now, before you have this conversation with someone, do you think you should do any sort of homework ahead of time? Absolutely, right? You should be able to come to this conversation prepared with every single date that the person has been late, so that you're actually now showing them factual information. Because how do you feel if your boss comes to you and says, hey, you know, Melody, I think you've been late this year and I'm really not liking this. And you're like, okay, how many times have I been late? Right? That's your gut reaction is you want facts, right? And so you need to provide that to your employee as well in order to be fair to them. So you always want to make sure as soon as you're going to tell them what's not working, you have to show them what's not working. If that means video, if that means an audit, if that means any sort of paperwork that you have, you want to absolutely show them something tangible so you can say, this is really not working, what is happening, okay? Then the next step, you got to focus on what needs to change, which also means you have to be prepared to show them what needs to change. So if that means that you have to re-shadow them or retrain them, if you have to show them how to do an audit, if you have to walk them through every single task, then perhaps that's what you would do, right? But in order to be fair and get sort of the agreement from the employee, you need to take them by the hand and say, let's go, you know, show me in the field what you're doing and I'm gonna show you what actually needs to be done. So you have to be as specific as possible. And then our last one is you have to tell them what the corrective action is. If people don't know what consequences are, we're unlikely to really care. If I know I'm not going to be fired, or I don't even know I'm going to be fired, if you've made these promises consistently over and over and nothing happens, then what's the point, right? I guarantee you've all seen this in businesses where there's someone who's consistently late, and nothing happens, and you have to pick up for them, or you have to stay late, or someone who consistently goes on leave, and just gets a doctor's note over and over and over. And I don't mean for real medical things. I just mean that they're like, I don't want to come to work, so I'm just going to get a doctor's note, And then who picks up the slack is you, right? And so when something is not happening with that employee, do you get frustrated? Absolutely, right? And it's not fair to everybody else. So by not telling someone what the corrective action is, or not actually following through with corrective action, you're just sort of giving them information without them really caring, because they're like, no big deal, nothing's gonna happen. You're never gonna fire me anyways. You need me more than I need you, right? So really being specific on that corrective action is gonna be important. So, okay, how long do you think it takes to actually go through a performance improvement plan with people? How many hours do you think it takes just for one person? You're right, it is a long time. Does anyone have like a time frame of how many hours you think it could be? Depends on role, yeah, but there is sort of a bit of an average when you think about like how long a conversation is and how many months it would be. It's at least 10 to 15 hours a person. The challenge is that takes 3 to 6 months. So if you're a small organization of like 50, 60 people, and you have 3 people, for example, on a PIP, that's your 40 hours. That's almost your 40 hours in a week, right? Because you have to gather evidence, you have to sit down and talk to them, you have to document, you have to put all that documentation in place. Like if you're gonna do it properly, it's going to take you that much time to do this for an employee, right? And you don't have time to do that. So this is another reason why I'm suggesting these straightforward, like no BS, come to Jesus talks, I've saved a lot of people from PIPs by having these, okay, Bob, let's sit down, what the fuck is going on, right? And like I've literally said that to people if this is their language, you want to speak their language, right? If they don't swear, I don't swear. If they swear, I swear, so that they feel comfortable in whatever's going on in the environment. But you have to find ways to save time, because HR, I mean, I love HR, I've been in it a long time, but it sucks the life and energy out of us, It takes a lot of time, and we have a lot of rules and paperwork and things that we have to do, so we have to find these efficiencies in places where we can, So if you can save even up to 47% of your employees being from a PIP, why not try it, right? Okay, how many of you guys also use AI for HR stuff? Yeah? Okay, so what we've seen a lot now is when you do have to do a PIP, people are gonna go into, let me chat GPT what I should say to the employee, right? And then you're gonna kind of cut and paste, maybe you change the name or put your company name or those kind of things in them. Has anyone ever thought that some AI could actually end up in a court of law, right? Some of your information could end up in a court sometime, or a mediation. Has anyone ever thought about that? Right. Ironically, I already have 2 cases that are in mediation, and one of them is probably gonna go to court. And so what happens with AI is we're using this as a tool to be able to help us do performance management, to do performance reviews, to do almost anything. But the documents in HR that are legal, such as a performance review, a PIP, any sort of write-up, et cetera, if you use AI for that, and it's really not in your own words, how are you gonna stand now in front of the judge and be like, yeah, I wrote Jose up, this is what I said, this is what she really is not performing, this is what's happening, et cetera. And so these cases now are being argued that, well, the individual has helped to use AI, it's just to help them as a tool. The problem is the person doesn't speak like this on a day-to-day basis, and now they're having to go speak in front of a judge, and it's also still not their language. So you're now trying to prove that you wrote this, but it's not actually in your language, right? So the other challenge that we have is HR and AI. A lot of people are starting to even just do ChatGPT to create policies. And they're like, oh, I need a policy on lateness. Okay, perfect. As long as you give it enough information, it'll probably spew out some sort of policy, which is great. But that policy now becomes your Bible, and that policy could end up at the Ministry of Labor, or it could end up in a court of law. And by that means it represents your brand, it represents your company. And we don't have any laws about using AI in HR anymore, except for in recruiting, right? We have that new law that started in January, where we have to disclose if we're using AI. But the rest of HR doesn't have any laws yet. But considering I already have 2 cases that have ended up in mediation, and one of them is going to go to court, I think you should revisit what we're doing related to HR. So one of the things that I wanted to ask now is, most people tend to use AI to like tailor emails, right? Or you want to make yourself sound a little bit more professional. So you're like, hey, this is the idea of what I want to do. Can you make this nicer? Or make this sound more legal, right? If you're just doing this in between yourselves in your own business, you should have no issue. But if you're in HR or you're in a leadership position and you're doing this to your employees, you have to now remember that they could keep a copy of that. They could print it, send it to themselves, etc., and now that becomes a legal document. So one of the better options to do is use the accessibility button on your phone. So I know that iPhones and Androids both have those. Has anyone used this before? It is phenomenal. So now I'm actually going to suggest you to take out your phones. And so I know iPhones more than Androids. Does anyone have an iPhone in the room? Okay. So I believe you have to have a 12 or higher, but when you scroll down and you look at your main screen, so if you scroll and you're looking at the screen, what you see up on the screen, right? There's this little button, what is circled in red. Do you see that? Does anyone see that button that I've circled in red? You can't see the red? It's here. You can't see my cursor either. I will show you. I think, yeah, you can't really see the red. I can see it. So this button, does anyone see this button in their phone? So that is your accessibility button. Yeah, I mean, I do know you have to need like a 12 or higher, and Androids I don't, but I checked with Androids. I have a lot of friends who have Androids too, and it's supposedly on your phone as well. You just it may not be in the exact same location.
I either need to add it in or our IT department removed it.
Yeah. Has anyone been able to find that button on their phone? Yeah? Okay. This button can help you a lot in HR, as a leader, etc. And I use this one a lot because then I'm not using ChatGPT for things, I'm just speaking. So I do emails this way. So I will click on that button and then open up an email and be like, okay, send Melody an email. Now Melody's name pops up, right? And then it's like, hi Melody, comma, perfect. So I wanted to chat today about that employee that you have. When do you want to be able to get together? Let me know, this is my schedule. Fabulous. Buff, send, that's it, right? It's so much easier to use that than to have to sit in front of your computer, what do I really want to say, send it to ChatGPT, and then at least it's still real. If you're unconfident about, obviously, your own skills and you want to finesse what you're saying, I understand that. But I can definitely say that you're going to have to think about protecting yourself moving forward with AI, that it's not just about using it to your advantage, is that it could actually hinder you in the future if you use AI too much. So the more you can try to do things that are real and in your own language, the better it's going to be for you. And then maybe just use AI for, like I said, finessing things, or maybe long documents, or perhaps things that you're gonna use for your brand or your company. But internally, I would definitely use this as much as possible. And it's quick and easy. It makes your life a lot easier. You can send emails like literally 30 seconds or less, you know? And it helps because I usually get about 100 to 120 emails a day. So in order to do that, I could just be sitting on my couch and bam, 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 you know, and it's done, it's easy. Then I have to go and file them myself, but that's okay, that's easy, right? Now that they're already answered and everything's good, it's a great way to sort of manage your time. So in order to think about your AI now, the other point again is if you want to use AI for HR, you always have to ensure that you're also asking AI the right questions. So a lot of times what I've noticed, and what I've noticed with these two cases, is that they weren't putting in the right prompts into AI, so the information they were getting was not actually considering the law in all of Ontario. Or perhaps you may not have been telling AI that you are a construction business, so I'm a construction business, I want you to write me a policy about being late and paying overtime. Does everyone know that you're not entitled to overtime in construction, right? But if you don't say that to AI, they're gonna give you something without having all the facts. So ensuring that you're actually telling AI the right information for them to regurgitate is going to be important for you as well, right? Because the more that you use your AI, whether it's Gemini, ChatGPT, Copilot, et cetera, the more it's gonna get used to you, but when it looks at everything related to, I guess, Google, pretty much, because that's what it's doing, it's looking at everything in the internet, it needs to know your niche, and it needs to know that you're in a company in, you know, environmental, or you're construction, or you're in electrical, or, you know, et cetera. Like, you have to share this information in order to get the right answers. So ideally, again, you are never gonna look at using AI for any performance reviews, no PIPs, and any sort of performance management, right? You could help finesse some of your things, but please don't use them for that, because it would be so hard to see you now end up in mediation or with a lawyer because you misused something or perhaps didn't give it the right information. All right, so any other legal documents that you may have in your business. So a lot of people don't think of HR as legal documents because a lawyer hasn't done them. Does anyone have employment agreements in their business? Right, so that is obviously considered a legal document. A lot of times a lawyer will write them for you, or a high-tenured, high-seasoned HR person who's been around will also write them for you. That is 100% a legal document for you, right? It helps protect you, but at the same time, it helps protect the employee. You never want to ask AI to write that for you. You always want to make sure that you have a lawyer review any of your employment agreements, because there's new things coming up all the time. So are you aware that in your employment agreements, you have to tell people how many breaks they're going to get, if they're exempt from breaks or if they're not, right? That information is supposed to be in an employment agreement by law, right? And so in construction, because we're exempt from these things, we can't just assume that, well, you're in construction, you have to know that. You have to be transparent with your employee and tell them that in the employment agreement. So another reason why, again, maybe AI is not going to know that. So a reason why you wouldn't want to use AI to have an employment agreement, right? Like I said before, you can't have a defensible judgment if you're using AI, because it's not things that you've observed in real time. So I get subpoenaed a lot, and I have to go stand in front of judge and say, yes, this is all the emails, all the communication I've had, et cetera. And they ask you the same thing. Is there anything else, and is this the truth? And I'm like, yep, it's the truth, you know. I witnessed this, I wrote this email, it came out of my mouth, et cetera, you know. And so the fact that I have to do that, I know that like any of you could ever be stuck in that situation as well, specifically if you help with HR, because we're the ones giving the termination letters, we're the ones giving those write-ups, and you know, just like managers are, but usually we administer those things. Then always keep in mind tone and wording. So the other thing that has been happening that has ended up already in courts is, when you guys have meetings, do you record your meeting with Copilot or something? You just hit record? Has anyone used that function yet? Right. So you know that if you use that function and someone is not at the meeting and they're just going to read the script, they didn't really understand the tone, right? They don't know if there was camaraderie happening. They don't know if there was any joke. They're just gonna read a script. And if someone now feels that something has happened or there's been discrimination or something, they can make a complaint. But that's not fair to everyone who was at the meeting who was actually experiencing this, right? So we have a case in court that is exactly that. So there's an employee who uses a term all the time and said, oh, I don't care, do whatever you want, that's okay, I'll just adapt, right? And so this person would say, I don't care. And did this frequently throughout this meeting. But it's normal language that they use. Anyone in this business would know that it's normal language. It's not derogatory, it's just because they're flexible. Now, someone who wasn't at the meeting in a higher position read the script, has made a complaint and said, what do you mean you don't care? You don't care about your job, you don't care about us, et cetera, whatever. The person who said, I don't care, got fired, and now they're suing, right? Because it's been normal language that the person has used on a consistent basis. Complete misinterpretation, 100% misinterpretation, right? But that company is going to have to pay the I don't care employee a few $100,000. Because now they also can't find a job where they could make the same amount of money that they made before. So these are little tiny things because of AI. And I feel like we're not even, we're skimming the surface, right? AI is going so much quicker than what we can handle. And we have to be vigilant and protect our own selves related to, I don't want that to happen to me. So anytime I have meetings with clients, I'm like, you can't record. And I'm saying that right now, nope, no recording. And I wait to start the meeting until they don't do the recording. Unless I'm doing a training session or something that's different, But if we're talking about an employee and there's a challenge with an employee, I 100% make sure that there's no recording happening. Because if someone wants to read it later, they could read something that they're gonna get misinterpreted, right? The other thing, again, is also consistency, is like we said earlier, however you speak and however you communicate with your company and with your customers, AI doesn't know that, right? And so when you use AI, they don't speak your language. They're just going to give something that sounds more educated than most of us are in the room, And so when I've I've done prompts before, and I've said, okay, why don't you give me a synopsis and so that I could understand, and I was 5 years old. That is fabulous. So if you want to try that prompt, that one works well, because then it'll explain something as easy as possible to anyone in the room, doesn't matter language, education, etc., that they'll understand. But unless you give it that prompt, a lot of times it's regurgitating words and things that you would never even use in your own day-to-day practice, right? So the other thing to consider, again, is if ever you use AI, it's got to be consistent with the language that you're using. And then holding people accountable. We know this all the time. Obviously in HR, that's what we do. We want people to do their job. We want them to move forward. We have to ensure that we're going to hold people accountable in what they do on a day-to-day basis. So, okay, my recap slide is not here either. There must be something, it's I apologize. I want to find you my recap slide here. Okay. While I do this, I want to find you my recap slide. I apologize. 1 second. Does anyone have any questions while I go and find this for you? No? Easy? Oh, I mean, all the time. Yeah, the employees are using AI all the time. I mean, I get employees who message me all the time because they want to complain about you, right? And then the employee, I'm like, I don't even know if they've graduated high school sometimes, and I'm like, I know that you did not write this. And so frequently I will reply back and say, I'm absolutely willing to help you. You need to tell me in your own words what the problem actually is. And I'm like, until you reply to me in your own words, I don't help them. Because they're pulling in stuff that has nothing to do with the situation. There's. Yeah,
are rambling on to the point where they are almost unreadable.
correct, yeah,
Even catching myself like having to read it out loud.
yep.
With the time because it's been so like make this longer.
Yeah, and or make it shorter, make it this, make it that. I don't know why I apologize, I can't find this slide for some reason.
But do you find that's something that is affecting outcomes in those cases with the employees using the email formats like that with AI?
Well, I think the challenge to that is that they're trying to be something that they're not, right? And so a lot of employees think that they know the law by using ChatGPT. And so they're like, okay, you want to write me up, and instead I'm going to tell you what you're doing is wrong, et cetera, you know? And then what's happening, I see, is a lot of managers now get nervous because now they've gotten a message, they're like, oh, I know you didn't write this, or is it your mother, is it your father who's a lawyer, you know, et cetera. And so I've even had some of my friends who are in leadership positions ask me, like, what do I do, Joe? Like, how do I respond to these people now? Because they're afraid that their words are going to be used against them, you know? I mean, the best thing is don't put it on an email. Go have a conversation with someone. You know, frequently a lot of HR issues happen because of lack of communication, you know? And so the more that you can communicate in person, and you only document when you absolutely have to, not just because it's easier for you to do it because you're too lazy to get up, you know? I mean, I frequently will message people and be like, hey, can we have a call? And then I'll have a call, and then instead I send them a recap after about what the call was, just to have, you know, just so that we're both on the same page. Kyle, this is what we talked about today. Great, perfect, thank you. It was great having a call with you, thank you very much. But then I'm controlling that narrative because I sent them that recap, you know. I would ask Kyle, do you agree with everything that's on the recap? And then, you know, please reply by showing, if you want me to adapt it, sure, no problem. But you still really need to protect yourself and really control that narrative so that the employee is not taking over, you know? So I think that's the biggest challenge right now with AI is that every employee now thinks that they're a lawyer, you know, and then they want to take us on. And I'm like, okay, let's go, no problem, you know? So, but yeah, any other questions? I apologize, I'm not sure what's wrong with the slide deck, but anyhow, stuff happens. So we got to adapt. Any other questions for HR? Any other employee issues that you have, things that I could help you with? Awesome. Okay, so as a recap for you, the best thing is to always ask the right questions, right? Determine if it's a skill, will, or an environment issue. And then from there, you can now obviously ask those right questions to the individual. And then if you can, try not to put them on a pip, right? Have that come to Jesus talk and be very, very straightforward. And so the come to Jesus talk recap, it's called an XYZ method. When you do X, the result is Y. Can you do Z instead? So that's sort of what we went through. That would have been on my recap slide. So it is, and it's an actual method. You can Google it. It's called the XYZ method, and it works great. I've been using it since I was working for Disney. So like, I don't know, 2001, I've been using that method, and it works fabulous. You can even use it on your partners at home. You know, when you don't pick up the milk, then we can't make this food for dinner. And you know, so, but yeah, it's great. So, okay. Well, thank you so much for attending. I really appreciate it. And I hope you guys have a great rest of the conference. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jose.
Thank you.
Very insightful. On behalf of the OCA, our speakers get sponsors, Saw the Way Right and Beacon Light. Please accept this gift as a token of our appreciation.
Thanks,
Very
Kyle.
insightful meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate it.